What if the UK exported Spitfires to the USA just before the start of the Second World War? What would that look like? Hello everyone, I'm Matt, this is Model Minutes, and join me on the workbench today as I show you how I built a fictional pre-World War II Spitfire in US colours. This project got started by a recent group build on my Discord server. The theme was called What If, so building any kind of topic which answers a what if question. In my particular case, what if the UK exported Spitfires to the USA before World War II? So to do this, I thought I'd answer the question by starting off with an Airfix Spitfire Mk.1. These are fairly cheap and simple kits, so I won't be doing a review in this build, I'll just be building it and showing you the results at the end. If you'd like to replicate something similar to this project, I'll put a list of the products I used during the build on the screen here. But anyways, on with the build. As is quite normal with my building process at the moment, the majority of the parts that I need at the relevant point are cut from the sprue using my side cutters. Any excess flash or rough areas of plastic can be sanded smooth using a sanding stick or carefully shaved away with a knife. Tamiya extra thin cement will be my glue of choice during this build, as I quite like the way that it flows into gaps and gives a strong bond. The first thing I decided to do with this particular kit was assemble the various cockpit parts. There are a number of components which need to be glued together, and I did this pretty much just following the guidance in the instructions. My plan is to try and get as much of this assembled before I start painting it, just to ensure that things are properly glued together without paint getting in the way. So with the cockpit now assembled and glued into place in one of the fuselage halves, it was time to get some paint on the model. Humbrol 78, which is a interior cockpit green colour, was thinned down with some Tamiya X20A acrylic thinner. This was a rough ratio of 2 parts paint to 1 part thinner, and this should help it flow onto the plastic and stick a little bit better than if it didn't have thinner on it. It should also try and avoid leaving brush strokes. Unfortunately, the Airfix plastic does tend to be a little bit oily and greasy, and I have neglected to give this a wash or clean any of this dirt off, so I do have to take care to make sure the paint actually sticks appropriately to all of these internal areas. A wash of the plastic parts and also a primer may have definitely helped, but seeing as the internal areas aren't going to be seen, I'm not going to worry too much if this isn't particularly neat. With that done, Humbrol 62, which is a leather colour, was carefully painted onto the headrest for the pilot and the backrest of his seat. After this, Vallejo black was used, and it was painted carefully onto the instrument panel, reflector gun sight, and some other small details within the cockpit area. There is a decal included in the kit to display on the control panel, and I used some Humbrol decal fix to apply this to the model. Having already soaked the transfer in warm water, it was released from the backing paper, slid into position, and the Humbrol decal fix applied to help stick it down onto the surface of the plastic. With all of those steps now done, I carefully joined the fuselage halves together. There is a bit of a seam along the joins, and I decided to sand these nice and smooth, to make them a little less noticeable. After this, I joined the lower wing surface onto the fuselage, and then the upper wing surfaces were added as well. This was followed by joining the horizontal tail surfaces onto the rear of the aircraft. Moving on to the lower side, I glued into place the tail wheel at the back of the plane, and then the components for the various air intakes and radiators. With the final piece being added at this point, the pitot tube. These are all glued in at this place to ensure that I get a nice strong bond. I did also opt to install the main landing gear legs, but I will leave the wheels off until much later. Turning my attention to the top of the aircraft, there is an aerial mast which has to be glued in at this point as well. The propeller assembly comes in a number of parts, and this was glued together at this point. It is worth noting that this kit is actually designed to have a freely rotating prop as an option. However, you do have to install that much earlier in the build before you close the fuselage halves together. I've decided to do it this way so that I can paint the propeller separately whilst it's not attached to the model, but it does mean that it probably won't freely rotate at the end. Here I'm testing the fit of the clear part for the canopy. There is a known fault with this kit in that the canopy is ever so slightly too long and it doesn't quite fit where it's supposed to. I know this from previous build experiences of this particular kind of kit. However, it is a really easy fix. All I had to do was sand off about 0.5 millimeter or so from the back of the cockpit canopy, and then it fit into place really nicely. Before I glue it in completely though, I do need to make sure that it has been masked, ready for some painting. This was done using my normal method where I apply tape, push it down into the canopy framework, and then with a sharp knife remove the excess. When that was done, I decided to glue it into place using some Humbrol Clear Fix. This glue should dry nice and strong whilst remaining clear and not reacting with the plastic and possibly causing it to fog up, which can happen with polycement. And with that done, it was time to get some paint on the model. I'm not going to bother priming this kit, instead I'm just going to get straight on with this cheap silver spray paint. This should stick to the model pretty well and not actually need a primer. I'm just being really lazy and just going to spray the whole thing silver. A couple of thin coats would be needed, and then after that was dry I would move on to the next step. And actually in this step it was time to prime everything else that's not yet been added to the model. So for these parts I'm just using Tamiya white primer, and these are all the bits which are still waiting to go onto the model. After this, I've got some of this Outlaw Black. This is a lacquer paint which has been kindly provided as a free sample to try out. And I quite like these lacquer paints because they go on really nicely and they dry really quickly. I used this to paint things such as the propeller and the tyres of the wheels. I'd also mask off an area on the nose of the aircraft which can be an anti-glare panel. This was given a coat of black paint as well. I would also replicate this step for some walkway panels on the wings, but I didn't record that because it was just simply masking and painting. After this I've got some Outlaw Red, and this was applied to the rudder of the aircraft. So the rudder of the aircraft is going to have some red, white and blue stripes on it. I've masked off the white areas and am now going to paint the red. With the red dry, I masked those areas and then painted what was left remaining with this French blue from Vallejo. I'm taking inspiration here from early pre-war United States aircraft. And with that done, it was time to move on to the decals. So because this is a fictional scheme, I'm just going to use any decals that I have lying around. And I've got some of these early World War II decals for the US Army Air Corps, I think it was at the time, left over from a Brewster Buffalo kit. So I cut out the ones I needed, soaked them in warm water, and then using Micro Set and Micro Sol, I applied them to the relevant places of the aircraft. I did, however, still use the registration codes from the original kit, as I think they probably would have been applied in the factory, and then the United States Army Air Force could overpaint them however they wanted to. The Brewster Buffalo kit also had some two-tone warning flashes for the tips of the propellers, so I thought it would be fun to use them in this kit as well. But then I realised that perhaps the decals weren't quite conforming to the surface as much as I would like, so a couple more repeated applications of Micro Sol from the red bottle helped soften them into the surface details a bit more. When that was done, I added on a couple of missing parts from the kit, such as the rudder, which has had all its masking removed, and the propeller. This is because in the next step I'm going to give this entire aircraft a varnish coat to seal in the decals, and I want everything to look uniform. So for this I'm using K-Color's XW1, which I think is like a semi-matte kind of finish. I still want to preserve the sort of metallic effect of the silver, but also seal in the transfers and make everything just look a little bit more uniform. The next step was to use some Vallejo silver to carefully paint the hubs of the wheels. I did this by hand, trying to take care to avoid all of the tyres, which are already painted black. I then mixed some burnt umber into this silver paint to create a kind of burnt metal kind of look, and this was painted onto the engine exhausts. When the engine exhausts were dry, they were then glued into the nose of the plane. This was followed by gluing on the wheels of the aircraft, making sure to get the flattened edge lined up with the ground. This has been designed into the kit to make it look as though there's weight pushing through the tyres. I then carefully removed my homemade masks for the cockpit canopy, and they seem to have done a pretty good job. And there is only one final part remaining, and that is the landing light which goes on the bottom of the aircraft. A tiny amount of Clearfix was used to hold this in place. And with that, I'm calling my fictional "What if the UK exported Spitfires to the US Air Force before World War II" build complete. And there we have it. I don't think this is a particularly bad build for a quick kind of project which took me about 3 days to complete on and off around other commitments. I particularly like that it manages to use up some decals that perhaps weren't going to be used and gives this kit a slightly different look to its standard box offering. I've built this tooling of the Spitfire from Airfix a number of times now, and I can see that it is showing its age a little bit. The moulding isn't perhaps as crisp as it once was, and there are scuffs and excess bits of flash in places, but this is probably one of the most used or most produced versions of the Spitfire, particularly within the Airfix range. It has seen a lot of wear and tear. That doesn't mean that it's not worth getting though, and I find with this particular kit you can make quite quick progress. I think there were probably lots of little bits and pieces I could have gone further with this kit, such as maybe adding some weathering or putting on some aerial wires, but I was kind of up against the deadline to make sure I got this in for the group build. To be honest though, I quite like the look of this in its pristine finish, and I think this is probably what it would look like had it been delivered from the factory straight to the United States. But what do you think of this build? Let me know down in the comments what your thoughts are on this and if you'd be tempted to try something similar. Personally, I had quite a bit of fun building this one, and it has given me some ideas for other fictional schemes I could do with other subjects in the future. I hope you've enjoyed this slightly different build video to normal, and it's thanks to my Model Club members that I can continue to produce content on a regular basis. A massive thanks to these guys on screen for their extra support. If you'd like to join them or find out more about supporting the channel, take a look at the links in the description. I do have some new members to the club, so I'd like to give a quick shout out to Nigel Brand, Adrian Hook, Tiger Shark Models, Connor O'Kane, Thunder of Legend, Jim Brook, Hyperfile, H. Paul Models, and Iten. Welcome to the club. There are other ways to help support the channel as well, and full information is below the video. If you like this kind of content and want to see more, make sure you subscribe with notifications on so you never miss a modelling upload. But from me here at the workbench today, the last thing to say is a massive thank you to you for watching this one, and I'll see you all again next time.